The grand ballroom shimmered like a diamond under the light of 1,000 crystals. It was a world of silk, perfume, and soft, careless laughter. On the edges of this brightness, a young woman moved with quiet purpose. Her name was Ilara, and she was working. She wore a simple black dress, the uniform of the staff, and carried a silver tray of empty champagne flutes that she needed to replace. The glasses on her tray clinked softly, a tiny sound lost in the swell of the orchestra. Ilara was a student, and this job, working for the incredibly wealthy family that owned the house, helped pay for her classes. As she moved through the crowd, she was invisible. The men in their sharp tuxedos and the women in their glittering gowns looked right through her, seeing only the tray in her hands. She didn't mind it much. It gave her a chance to observe, to imagine the lives of these people who seemed to float on a cloud of money. But tonight she felt a small, familiar ache. The music was a waltz, a tune her father used to hum while he cooked their dinner. He had loved to dance. He would sweep her mother around their small kitchen, both of them laughing, and then he would grab Ilara's hands and spin her until she was dizzy with joy. He had passed away 2 years ago, and since then her world had become all about responsibility, studying, working, surviving. There was no room for spinning or laughter. Her eyes scanned the room not as a guest would, but as a worker, looking for empty glasses or anyone who needed assistance. That's when she saw him. He was standing alone on a terrace that opened up from the main ballroom, half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. He wasn't looking at the party. His back was to the noise, his shoulders slightly slumped as he stared out into the dark garden. He didn't look like the other guests. They stood with a confident posture, owning the space around them. This man seemed separate. He held a glass of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking from it. He just swirled it slowly, lost in thought. Ilara felt a sudden pinch of sympathy. In a room full of couples dancing and groups chatting, he looked profoundly lonely. Maybe he was a reporter who felt out of place, or a friend of a friend who didn't know anyone. She recognized that feeling of being on the outside, looking in. An idea, both foolish and bold, popped into her head. It was the music and the memory of her father. Her father would never have let someone stand alone at a party where there was music playing. He would have said, "No one should be alone with a song in the air." Her heart started to beat a little faster. This was not her role. Her job was to be quiet, efficient, and unseen. To approach a guest, especially with a personal request, was crossing a line. She could get in trouble. The head butler, a stern man, would certainly disapprove. She picked up a fresh tray of drinks and walked towards the terrace, telling herself she was just doing her job, just checking if the guests outside needed anything. She stepped through the curtain. The night air was cool compared to the stuffy warmth of the ballroom. The man didn't turn around. She cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like a fresh drink?" He turned, and she got a proper look at him. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe in his early 30s. He had kind, tired eyes and a face that seemed more suited to smiling than the serious expression he wore now. He looked at her, not through her, and gave a small, polite shake of his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine with this one." His voice was calm and quiet. It wasn't the loud, booming voice of some of the other men inside. It was his normal. This gave her a little courage. The orchestra inside struck up a new song, another waltz. This was her chance. The words felt like they were going to stick in her throat, but she pushed them out. "It's a beautiful song," she said, her voice a bit shaky. "It's a shame to waste it." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to staff making conversation. He glanced towards the dance floor and then back at her. "It is a nice song," he agreed, but made no move to go inside. This was it. Now or never. Ilara took a small breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Sir," she began, her face feeling warm, Would you be my dance partner?" The moment the words left her mouth, she felt a hot wave of embarrassment. What was she thinking? This was a terrible idea. He would laugh at her or get angry or call her manager. But he didn't do any of those things. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. A silence hung between them, filled only by the distant music. He was studying her face, and she forced herself not to look down at her shoes. She saw him take in her simple dress, her honest, hopeful, and slightly terrified expression. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It completely transformed him, making him look younger and much more approachable. The tiredness in his eyes seemed to lift just a little. A dance partner? he repeated, almost to himself. He looked from her to the crowded ballroom and then back at her. He seemed to be considering it, not as a master considers a servant's request, but as one human considering another's. Finally, he nodded. You know, it has been a very long time since I've danced, but yes, I would be honored. He placed his untouched glass on the stone railing of the terrace and offered her his arm. It was a simple, old-fashioned gesture. Alara, her heart now pounding with a mix of fear and excitement, tentatively slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. His arm was firm. He led her not onto the main dance floor where all the important guests were, but to a quieter corner of the room near the back, where a few other couples were dancing, away from the center of attention. He turned to face her, and for a moment they just stood there. Then he placed one hand gently on her waist and took her other hand in his. His touch was light and respectful, and then they began to move. Alara had been so nervous about asking that she hadn't stopped to think about the dancing itself. But he was a good dancer, leading with a gentle confidence that was easy to follow. At first she was stiff, hyper-aware that she was a maid dancing with a guest. But as the music swirled around them, she began to relax. "You're very kind to ask me," he said as they turned. "I must admit I was not having a very good night." "I could tell," Alara said, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, you just looked like you might appreciate some company." He smiled again. "You were right. I find these events can be a bit much. All talk and no real conversation. Do you know what I mean?" Alara nodded. "I listen to a lot of it, mostly about stocks and golf and who is vacationing where." He laughed, a real warm sound that was nicer than any of the polite chuckles she'd heard all evening. "Exactly. Not the most fascinating topics. So what is a more fascinating topic? What do you do when you're not saving lonely guests from boredom?" "I'm a student," she said. "I study literature." "Ah, books," he said, his eyes lighting up. "A world with much better parties than this one. Tell me, what are you reading right now?" And so as they danced, they talked. They didn't talk about his work or her job. They talked about stories, about faraway places they both wanted to see, about the power of a well-written sentence. For those few minutes, Alara forgot about her uniform. She forgot she was working. She was just a young woman, dancing with a kind, interesting man who listened to her like what she said actually mattered. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of the old joy her father had always brought out in her. And for the man, whose name was Liam, and who owned the very house they were dancing in, it was the first real conversation he'd had in months. He wasn't the Harrington heir, the millionaire, the boss. He was just a man, dancing with a woman who had seen past his lonely posture and offered him a moment of simple human connection. The song, like all good things, came to an end. They stopped moving and the spell was broken. The noise of the party rushed back in. "Thank you," Liam said, his voice sincere. "That was the best thing that's happened to me all week." Before Alara could reply, a serious-looking man in a suit approached them. "Sir, Mr. Thorne is looking for you. He says it's urgent." Liam's face tightened slightly, the easygoing expression fading back into one of duty. "Of course." He turned back to Alara. "Thank you again," he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. Alara stood alone for a moment, the ghost of his hand still on her waist. She smiled to herself, hugging the secret, wonderful memory close. She picked up her tray and slipped back into her role, the invisible maid once more. She was sure she would never see him again, but she was glad for the one dance. She had no idea that the lonely man from the terrace was in fact the master of the house, and that their story was only just beginning. The morning after the ball, the grand house felt like a different world. The music was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of vacuum cleaners. The glittering chandeliers were now being carefully dusted by staff on tall ladders. The air smelled of lemon-scented polish instead of perfume. Alara was back in her simple work clothes, helping to strip the linen from the guest room beds. As she worked, her mind kept drifting back to the dance. A small private smile would touch her lips when she remembered the feeling of spinning across the floor, the sound of his laugh. It felt like a beautiful dream she'd had, something separate from her real life. She didn't even know his name. She thought of him simply as the terrace man. She assumed he was just a visitor who had left with the other guests. A pleasant memory she would probably carry for a long time. Meanwhile, in his private study on the top floor of the house, the man from the terrace was having a much harder time focusing. His name was Liam, and he was the owner of everything Alara was currently cleaning. He sat at a large, expensive desk, staring at a computer screen filled with numbers and graphs. But his mind wasn't on business. He couldn't stop thinking about the young woman with the tray. Her bold question, the way her face had been a mixture of bravery and fear when she asked him to dance. The intelligent light in her eyes when they talked about books. For a few minutes he hadn't been the Harrington heir, a title that felt heavy and complicated. He had just been a man. The simplicity of that moment was something he hadn't realized he was missing so badly. He found himself walking to the window and looking down into the gardens where the staff were working. He wondered if she was down there. He felt a strong urge to see her again, to have another conversation that wasn't about profit margins or social obligations, but a problem immediately presented itself. If he sent for her directly as the master of the house, it would be strange and intimidating. She would be nervous. She would put up a wall, call him sir, and the easy connection they had shared would be gone. He knew he couldn't approach her as who he truly was. Not yet. Later that day, an idea came to him. He called the head of the housekeeping staff, a woman named Mrs. Davies. He tried to sound casual, not too interested. "Mrs. Davies," he began, "the foundation is considering a new research project, looking into local community programs. I need some fresh perspectives, perhaps from someone younger, who is familiar with the city. Do we have any staff who are also university students?" Mrs. Davies, a practical woman, was a little surprised by the request. Mr. Harrington usually didn't involve himself with staff matters. "Well, sir," she said, "there is Alara. She works part-time and studies at the university. She's a very bright girl. Alara, the name suited her." "I see," Liam said, keeping his voice even. "Could you arrange for her to have a meeting with me? I'd like to ask her a few questions. Please present it as a small paid research task. I don't want to disrupt her regular duties." And so, a little while later, Alara was summoned to Mrs. Davies's office. She felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? Had someone seen her dancing with a guest and reported her? "Alara," Mrs. Davies said, her tone not unkind. "Mr. Harrington has a special task. He needs some research assistance for the family foundation. He has asked for you specifically as you are a student." Alara's eyes widened. Mr. Harrington, the mysterious, reclusive owner of the house? She had never even seen him properly. Why would he ask for her? This sounded important and scary. Me? But why me? She asked, confused. "He didn't say," Mrs. Davies replied. "But when Mr. Harrington asks for something, we provide. Be at his study in 10 minutes. And remember, be respectful." With her heart thumping loudly in her chest, Alara walked to the main staircase that led to the private family floors, a part of the house she had never entered. She felt completely out of her depth. She knocked softly on the large wooden door of the study. "Come in," a voice called from inside. She opened the door and stepped into the room. It was filled with books and had a beautiful view of the garden. And there, standing by the window, was the man from the terrace. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The terrace man. But what was he doing in Mr. Harrington's study? For a wild second, she thought maybe he was a personal assistant. He turned and saw her, and a warm, familiar smile appeared on his face. "Hello again," he said. Alara was too stunned to speak. She just stood there staring. Seeing her confusion, he walked towards her, but not too close. "I suppose I have some explaining to do," he said gently. "My name is Liam Harrington." The words hung in the air. Harrington. The name was on the sign outside the estate gates. It was on the paychecks. It was the name of the family she worked for. The terrace man was the millionaire. All the color drained from Alara's face. She felt a hot wave of embarrassment and shock. She had asked her boss to dance. She had talked to him about books as if he were just a normal person. She had felt a connection with him, and the whole time he was the one person in the room who was the absolute center of that entire world. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, looking down at the floor. "I didn't know. On the terrace. I would never have—" "Please don't apologize," Liam said quickly, his voice soft. "There is nothing to be sorry for. That dance was the highlight of my week. Truly. I should be the one apologizing. I should have told you who I was," he gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. The research task is real. I do need some help. But I wanted to thank you properly. And I was hoping we could talk again without you holding a tray." Ilara slowly sat down, her mind racing. This was too much to process. He was being so nice, but it felt dangerous. This was her employer. This was a millionaire. Their worlds were not supposed to mix like this. Seeing the hesitation on her face, Liam didn't push. He sat down opposite her and picked up a file. The foundation is looking to donate to after-school programs for children in the city, he explained, his tone becoming more businesslike, giving her space. You live in the city, you study there. I was hoping you could tell me about the areas that might need the most help. What kind of programs would actually be useful? The reports I get can be a bit dry. He was asking for her opinion, not as a maid, but as a person who knew things he didn't. Slowly, her professional panic started to settle. She knew about this topic. She had volunteered at a community center herself. She began to talk, at first a bit shyly, then with more passion. She told him about the lack of safe places for kids to go, the need for tutoring, for libraries that were actually open in the evenings. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, not interrupting. The meeting lasted for 30 minutes. By the end, Ilara had almost forgotten she was talking to a millionaire. It felt like the conversation on the dance floor, two people sharing ideas. As she got up to leave, Liam stood as well. Thank you, Ilara, this was incredibly helpful. He paused. I often take a walk in the park near the university on Tuesday afternoons. It helps me think. If you happen to be there and were willing, I would enjoy continuing our conversation. It wasn't a command from a boss. It was an invitation from one person to another. Ilara looked at him. The kind, tired eyes were the same as they were on the terrace. The man who loved books was still in there, behind the title and the wealth. She gave a small, hesitant nod. I finish my class at 3 on Tuesdays. A genuine smile spread across his face. So do I, he said. Walking out of the study, Ilara felt like she was in a daze. The terrace man had a name, and it was a name that carried immense power. He wanted to see her again. A part of her screamed that this was a terrible idea, a complication she did not need. But another part, the part that had felt so alive dancing and talking about books, was curious. Who was the real man behind the famous name? She wasn't sure, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. The following Tuesday, Ilara's mind was a battlefield. All morning, a nervous voice in her head told her to go straight home after class. This was a path filled with trouble. He was her boss. He was a millionaire. Their worlds were like oil and water. They were not meant to mix. Getting closer could only lead to confusion and heartache. But when her last class ended, her feet seemed to have a mind of their own. Instead of turning left towards the bus stop, she found herself walking straight ahead towards the park. She told herself she was just going for a walk. It was a public park, after all. Anyone could be there. The park was a beautiful green space in the middle of the city. Children played on the swings. Couples strolled along the paths, and old men sat on benches feeding the pigeons. It was a world away from the silent, polished halls of the Harrington mansion. She saw him almost immediately. He was sitting on a bench near a large fountain, dressed not in a suit but in simple trousers and a casual jacket. He looked normal. He was watching the water, and he hadn't noticed her yet. For a moment, she considered turning back. But then he looked up. His eyes found hers, and a warm, hopeful smile appeared on his face. He stood up as she approached. You came, he said, and he sounded genuinely pleased and a little relieved. I said I would, Ilara replied, her voice a bit quiet. I know, but I wasn't sure if you would change your mind. He gestured to the path. Shall we walk? They fell into step beside each other. The silence between them was a little awkward at first, filled with the weight of who he was. This is my favorite place in the city, he said after a while, breaking the silence. No one asks me for anything here. No one talks to me about business. It's nice, Ilara agreed. It feels real. Exactly, he said, looking at her with appreciation. Real. That's the word for it. They walked past an ice cream cart. On an impulse, he turned to her. Do you like ice cream? She couldn't help but smile. Who doesn't like ice cream? He bought 2 cones, a simple chocolate for her and a vanilla for himself. They continued their walk, licking their ice creams like a couple of students. It was such a simple, silly thing, but it broke down the last of the formal walls between them. It was hard to be intimidated by a man who was carefully trying to stop his vanilla ice cream from dripping on his hand. The conversation started to flow, just as it had when they danced. He asked her about her classes, and she told him about the novel she was studying, her voice becoming animated as she explained the story. He listened, truly listened, asking questions that showed he was interested. He, in turn, told her about his life, but not the parts she expected. He didn't talk about money or deals. He talked about the pressure he felt, the weight of his family's name. He confessed that he had always loved history, but had been pushed into business school. He spoke of his dream to travel not to five-star resorts, but to see ancient ruins and walk through old forests. "It sounds lonely," Alara said softly without thinking. He looked at her, surprised. Then he nodded, his gaze drifting away. "It can be," he admitted. "You're surrounded by people, but you're never sure if they see you or just your situation." She understood that feeling completely. At the parties she worked, she was invisible. In his world, he was too visible, but for all the wrong reasons. In their own ways, they were both alone. This became their new routine. They began to meet every Tuesday. Sometimes they would walk in the park. Other times they would find a small, quiet coffee shop near the university, where no one knew them. They were just two people in a crowd. With each meeting, Alara felt herself falling for him. It wasn't because of his money or his house. It was because of the person he was when he was with her. He was thoughtful, a little shy, and he made her laugh. He remembered small things she told him, like her favorite flower or how she was worried about an exam. But her life became a strange balancing act. On Tuesdays, she would be with Liam, talking and laughing as equals. But on Wednesdays, she would be back at the mansion, wearing her maid's uniform, dusting the very rooms he lived in. She would sometimes see a book he had left on a table, a book they had discussed, and her heart would give a complicated squeeze. She felt a growing guilt. She was keeping a secret from Mrs. Davies and the other staff. She was sharing a secret with the master of the house, and it felt like a betrayal of her role. She was living a double life. One afternoon, she was vacuuming the large living room. She was thinking about her last conversation with Liam, about a movie they both wanted to see. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear someone enter the room. It was Liam's business partner, a tall, serious man who was often at the house. He looked at her with a frown. "You there?" he said, his voice sharp. "Have you seen Mr. Harrington?" He was supposed to be in a meeting. Alara quickly turned off the vacuum cleaner. Her heart was pounding. For a terrifying second, she almost said, "He's meeting me for coffee later." She caught herself just in time. "No, sir," she said, looking down at the floor. "I haven't seen him." The man sighed, annoyed. "Fine. Just get on with your work." He left the room, and Alara leaned against the wall, her legs feeling weak. The contrast was shocking. One moment she was a confidant, a friend. The next she was you there, just a maid who was in the way. The two worlds had collided, and it left her feeling shaken and confused. That evening, when she met Liam at their usual bench, he could see something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, his face full of concern. She told him about the incident with his partner. "It just felt strange," she finished, wrapping her arms around herself. "It reminded me that this," she gestured between the two of them, "isn't real." "Not in the real world?" "In the real world, you are Mr. Harrington and I am the maid." Liam's face fell. He looked genuinely hurt. "This is real," he said, his voice intense. "What we talk about here, the things we share, that is more real to me than anything that happens in my office. Please believe that." He looked so earnest, so different from the powerful man everyone else saw. Alara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so much it hurt. "I want to," she whispered. "Then let's make it more real," he said. He took a small, nervous breath. "There's a small Italian restaurant just a few blocks from here. The food is simple, but it's good. Would you have dinner with me?" "Not as a secret. Just as two people. A real date. Out in the open." It was a huge step. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But looking into his hopeful eyes, the fear was slowly being melted by a warm, brave feeling. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I would like that." His smile was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. In that moment, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of the park, their secret world felt strong enough to survive anything. But they both knew, without saying it, that the outside world was waiting and it wouldn't be ignored forever. The little Italian restaurant was everything he had promised. It was warm and cozy, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and baking bread filling the air. There were no crystal chandeliers, just simple candles and old wine bottles on each table. For the first hour, it was perfect. Alara had been nervous walking in, half expecting everyone to stare at them. But no one did. They were just another couple in a city full of couples. Liam, in his casual clothes, looked like any other young man taking his girlfriend out for dinner. They talked and laughed easily. He told her funny stories about his travels that had gone wrong, and she shared tales of her university friends and their silly adventures. For a beautiful, suspended moment, the charade worked. The invisible wall between their worlds seemed to have vanished. He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and sure. "I'm really happy, Alara," he said, his voice soft. "Being with you feels easy." Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "I'm happy too," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. It was later, as they were finishing their meal, that the world decided to crash back in. The restaurant owner, a friendly man with a big mustache, came to their table to ask if they had enjoyed the food. He and Liam chatted for a moment. Then the owner's wife called him from the kitchen, using a term of affection in Italian. The owner smiled. "I must go." "The boss calls," he joked and walked away. Liam turned back to Alara, a playful smile on his face. "See? Even I know what that feels like." Alara smiled back, but a tiny, cold seed of doubt had been planted. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know," he said, taking a sip of his water. "The board of directors, the senior partners. Sometimes it feels like I have a dozen bosses. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone wants a piece of my time. It's the worst part of the job." He said it lightly, as a simple complaint anyone might make about their work. But his work was not like anyone else's. His job was being the boss of almost everyone he knew, including her. Ilara's smile faded slightly. She looked down at her plate. "It must be difficult," she said, her voice quiet. He didn't notice the change in her tone. He was in a good mood, feeling comfortable. "It is, especially when I have to make big decisions like the one about the new community center. The plans are finally ready. The architects have outdone themselves. Community center." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. Her head snapped up. The community center?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The one we talked about, remember? You gave me all those wonderful ideas. Well, the project is approved. We're breaking ground next month. We're naming it after my grandmother. The Eleanor Harrington Center. It's going to be the Foundation's new flagship project." He kept talking about the design, the funding, the press coverage it would get. But Alara was no longer listening. A terrible cold understanding was washing over her. The project, her ideas, the research task he had given her that first day in his study. It had all been real, but it was also a part of his world, a world of grand gestures and family legacies. The Eleanor Harrington Center. It sounded so official, so permanent, and so completely separate from the small, personal conversations they had shared in the park. He had used her thoughts, her passion, and folded them into his Millionaire's project, putting his family's famous name on it. It felt like he had taken something precious from her and put it in a museum behind glass. He finally noticed her silence. "Ilara, is everything all right?" She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the kind man from the terrace. She saw the millionaire. She saw her boss. "The community center," she began, her voice trembling. "You never told me it was going to be a flagship project. You never mentioned your grandmother's name." He looked confused. "Well, no. The details were still being worked on. I thought you'd be pleased. You helped make it happen." "Pleased?" The word came out as a broken laugh. "I shared those ideas with you because I thought we were just talking. I thought you cared. But you were just doing research. You were gathering information from the local girl, the maid who knows the city." His face went pale. "No, that's not true." "It wasn't like that at all, wasn't it?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "You took my thoughts and you're turning them into a monument for your family. Did you ever see me as anything other than a fascinating project? A charity case you could be kind to? The poor maid with interesting opinions?" "Ilara, please," he said, his voice desperate now. "You have to believe me. What I feel for you is real. The project is separate. It's my work." This, he gestured between them, is us. But there is no us, she said, her voice rising enough that people at nearby tables glanced over. There can't be. Don't you see that? There is you, in your giant house naming buildings after your family, and there is me, the person who cleans that house. I live in both of your worlds, Liam. I have to clean the dust from the models of the buildings you name after your grandmother. I am not a part of that world. I just work there. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. The happy, cozy atmosphere of the restaurant was gone. She felt exposed and foolish. All this time, she whispered, the hurt crushing her chest. I thought we had something special. But it was just a game for you. A little escape from your real life. Well, the game is over. She turned to leave. Ilara, wait, he pleaded, standing up. Don't go. Let me explain. She stopped and looked back at him one last time. The man she had danced with, laughed with, and trusted, now looked like a stranger. Goodbye, Mr. Harrington, she said. And then she walked out of the restaurant, leaving him standing alone amidst the checkered tablecloths and the flickering candlelight. The truth was out, and it had shattered everything. The days after the restaurant felt gray and heavy for Ilara. It was like a fog had settled over her life. She went to her classes. She did her work at the mansion, but she moved like a machine, feeling nothing. The other maids noticed she had become very quiet, but they thought she was just tired. Every corner of the big house reminded her of him. The terrace where they first met. The hallway outside his study. She avoided those places when she could. She threw herself into her studies, trying to forget the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was over. She had to accept that. For Liam, the days were just as empty. The big silent house felt more like a prison than ever. He had tried to explain, to send messages, but she did not reply. He saw the hurt in her eyes every time he closed his own. He had been a fool. In trying to share his world with her, he had only shown her the distance between them. He thought the community center was a way to honor her ideas, but she saw it as him claiming them for his own. He understood now why she felt that way. He sat in his study looking at the fancy plans for the Eleanor Harrington Center. It all felt cold and meaningless. It was just another project, another building with his family's name on it. It didn't have her heart in it anymore. It didn't have any heart at all. Weeks passed. The season changed and the air grew cooler. Ilara focused on one thing, her final exams. Her graduation was coming soon, a goal she had been working towards for years. It was the one thing in her life that was truly hers, that no one could take away. One afternoon, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived for her at the staff quarters. Her heart jumped, thinking it was from the university. But the return address was different. It was from the Harrington Foundation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Was this his way of firing her? Or maybe a legal letter telling her she couldn't talk about their project? But it wasn't any of those things. Inside was a letter and a formal application form. The letter began, "Dear Ilara," it was from him. Her first instinct was to tear it up, but something made her keep reading. "I am writing to you not as your employer, but as someone who made a very big mistake. I am sorry. I am sorry for not understanding how my world looks from where you are standing. I was so happy to have found you that I forgot to see you clearly. You were right. The community center should not be a monument to my family. It should be a place for the community. That was your idea, and it was a brilliant one. I have put the plans on hold. But this letter is not about the center. It is about you. I have never met anyone with a mind as sharp and a heart as good as yours. You saw the person I was behind the money, and you were not impressed by the money itself. That is a gift I did not know how to value. Enclosed is an application for a paid internship with the Harrington Foundation.
It is not a gift.
It is not a favor. The internship is overseen by a committee that does not know you and does not know I am writing this. All applications are reviewed with the names hidden, so the committee only sees your qualifications and your ideas. The decision to apply is yours. The decision to accept you if you apply is theirs. I will have no part in it. I know you are graduating soon, and I know you will build a remarkable life with or without this opportunity, but I wanted to make sure you knew it existed. Your future should be built by your own hands. The letter was signed simply, Liam. Ilara read it again. And then a third time. The anger she had been holding on to began to soften. This was not the gesture of a proud millionaire trying to buy her back. This was the act of a man who had truly listened. He was not offering her a handout. He was offering her a hand up and then stepping back to let her climb on her own. He was giving her a choice with no pressure. It was the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for her. The day of her graduation was bright and sunny. She stood with her classmates, wearing her cap and gown, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had finished her degree through her own hard work. As she walked across the stage to get her diploma, she scanned the crowd of families. She didn't expect to see anyone she knew, but then near the back, standing alone and away from the crowds, she saw him. He was there. He wasn't trying to come forward. He wasn't dressed in a suit, just simple clothes. He was just there to see her succeed, to witness her day. He offered a small, tentative smile and a nod as if to say, "I see you, and I am proud of you." After the ceremony, her friends and their families were hugging and taking pictures. Ilara stood for a moment watching Liam from a distance. He began to turn as if to leave to give her space. "Liam," she called out. He stopped and turned back, his expression full of hope and fear. She walked towards him, the crowd flowing around them. She stopped a few feet away. "Thank you for the letter," she said. "Thank you for reading it," he replied. "I applied for the internship," she said. "I sent the application yesterday." A real smile, the one she remembered from the park, broke across his face. "That's wonderful. I hope you get it. They make their decision next week," she said. She took a deep breath. "And thank you for coming today." "I wouldn't have missed it," he said softly. "You worked so hard for this." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the past hurts and misunderstandings slowly melting away in the sunshine. "Would you?" he began hesitantly. "Would you like to get a coffee?" "There's no project to talk about. No business, just coffee." Ilara looked at this man who had seen her, truly seen her, from the very first night on the terrace. He had made mistakes, but so had she. He was trying, in his own way, to build a bridge between their two worlds, not by pulling her into his, but by meeting her in the middle. She smiled, a genuine, happy smile that reached her eyes. "I would like that very much," she said. And as they walked away from the university, side by side, they both knew that their story was not about a millionaire and a maid. It was about two lonely people who had found each other. Their next dance together was just beginning, and this time it would be on their own terms as true partners, ready to face whatever came next.